Now, 1 foot off center.
And now it's all gonna blow your mind.
Rick Maddison here with 1 foot off center. I'm here with our spiritual advisor, Scott Lanigan. Jeff Cox from Acer Insurance, Simply Benefits. Mattiussi, consultant to, well, just a whole bunch of communities in BC. We appreciate your time, gentlemen. Our podcast, 1 foot off center, brought to you by the good folks at Soil to Sod. These are the same folks who have saved more marriages than a marriage counselor. Why? Because they get the job done in 1 day. 1 day versus weeks or months while the spouse, because after a while the spouse is going to grind her teeth because she's like, why did I marry that schlep?
Yeah.
He's a procrastinator. He doesn't get anything done.
All he does, that's right. He just plays pickleball all the time.
Stop dating too soon. You want to call Soil to Sod. Get it done right, all that kind of good stuff. Okay, so we're heading into August. We are in August. We are in August. Smoke and Noggin, as some have called it. And basically, this year seems to be, knock on wood, better as far as the forest fires. Now, we've got some ample rain. It feels like we're going to squeak out this summer, even though some have said on a documentary, BC is burning. Watch it at your local theaters. But I feel like if they save some money, can we put more money towards mitigation? Can we actually effectively take that money that we would have spent on firefighting and put it on mitigation? And we'll start it off with you, Mr. Ron, because you're working with the province. You know stuff about stuff. Can we effectively, if we save some money, and I'll put it another way, if you save money on snow removal during the snow, like, does that budget get to go to other places to help out
within the same kind of sphere?
But that's what I'm asking is we might save some money on firefighting. We spent up to $1 billion in 2023. Can we effectively do this, reallocate, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the province allocates funds. City did. I mean, we have a snow removal budget. If this year was light, then that money's retained for next year because we know it fluctuates rapidly, and then next year we have to maybe dig into those reserves. So we're not like now approving more tax dollar to deal with it. Province a little bit different, but certainly we're seeing in the last year or two, they've really changed their focus. And used to get federal disaster relief would come after the fact. And in 2003, we knew that there was a part of the upper mission that because it was burnt so badly that it was going to now have mudslides. We went to them and said, look, we have an engineer. If it gets too much rain in this area, we're going to have a mudslide. Could you help us mitigate that? They said, no. But if it slides, you'll get disaster relief. And of course, it did. We ended up, it wasn't a massive slide, but it did. Mud went through people's houses at the bottom of Ship Lake Road. And so over time, you finally in the last 2 years have they started to shift funding into mitigation, more and more into mitigation, particularly in the last year or so. So I think they're on the right track now. If it's a slow year, will they save money? I'm not sure it'll be allocated that way. Again, in the province, I think funds things very, very differently. Certainly I saw dealing with Lytton, people said, well, the province is going to help us. And I was like, actually, no, they're not. You have to go and make a special request to the Treasury Board that then finds money. They had no money allocated even for recovery. So they fund things very differently.
Jeff Cox, do you think, effectively, are we, because we've had a decent year, I mean, the mitigation is one thing, but I don't know, is this something that we should be looking at? Is just pouring some money on mitigation and making sure communities aren't at risk?
I think it's a loaded question, but yeah, of course. And there are, Ron talked about it on a couple podcasts ago, fire smart communities that I think was Wilton, right?
It's Wilton, great example.
That literally had almost zero loss in our last massive disaster here. So there are a ton of, and again, when you get outside of Canada, and you've done this through documentary, you can go into states that have done it well. These are simplistic things. you know, and again, this gets a little bit contentious, but it's that fine line, right? To Ron's point, you know, if the disaster doesn't happen, you don't get the funding. There was a lot of talk about that in the last fire here, that they let that fire burn for that reason. You know, that's not the way our government should run, but it's the reality. I don't love it. You know, obviously we should be doing this. I mean, I go back to a similar example, right? But when the Fraser Valley flooded and the Coquihalla got wiped out, I mean, people were just distraught. But that's a floodplain. like we actually have dikes that keep that area dry.
Most of the time.
Yeah, and then people were like, can you believe this? I can, it's a floodplain. And we didn't service or change the dikes in 50 years.
Right.
And everyone is like, it's the environment, which it is, but like we played a pretty big role in that. Like, I mean, there was a bunch of stuff that came out after the fact that they pretty much ignored those dikes for years, and then you know, said, look at what climate change is doing. Well,
And it always seems like in the U.S. especially, they interview that one guy who always wants to stay with the house, and he's got a who farted, you know, hat on, and they're like, so why did you stay here?
It's a mega hat for sure.
Why did you stay here, sir? Well, I'll tell you what, I was surprised it flooded again and again. And did it flood last year? Yes, it did, but it was different. And the year before that, yeah. And you think after a while the insurance companies go, well, wait a second, I can't continue to do this.
Well, and they are.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the reality for a lot of people, hitting them much harder in the U.S. than it is here in Canada. But it's coming, and it's going to come hard. And you're seeing in your premiums, and for the record, I'm not on that side of the business, but I'm seeing my own premiums. What the? You know what I mean? When you guys make a mistake. Yeah. It's just it is our reality. But the bigger concern is when markets go hard and they decide they're just going to pull out, and they decide that this valley is too much of a risk, which they have done in Southern California. In Southern California, there are areas now where you cannot get home insurance.
Well, you can get state-funded insurance, which is about $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
That's a Gavin Newsom thing.
That was a big deal in the last fires. They talked about that down in California. It was, and by the way, I used to live in that Sumas Flats, and there was pictures people had back when I lived there. They would have the pictures when they were water skiing in those areas, because everybody knew it's a dike. That's the I mean, the dikes hold the water. It's not a shock and awe type of experience. So it's really funny. I think the mitigation pieces that get often overlooked too are not only mitigating the fires, but when the fire happens, of the wraparound supports for families and communities that are still devastated years later that can't recover. And like even at that place at work, we, one of the things we did is we called emergency services in the last one, and we did 15,000 meals for individuals that were vulnerable or kind of displaced, and then also emergency services. And there's even no funding for those type of things to really help out in the way that needed to be helped. And so
I got away on this. So I had a staff member, her and her husband and 3 kids in Prospera. And I'm like, no, this is not happening. We're going to make this. I'm going to figure out a way. Like we're going to figure out how to get through this. Phone a local hotel that's a client, and go to my contact there and go, hey, how does the process work here? I have a family of 5 with young kids in Prospera, and he says we're at 20% occupancy and have been for 3 days because no one can connect the dots and get them here. Oh. So I said, if I send them there and just cover the bill, are you good with that? Yep, tell them to be here as soon as they want. I mean, that's the crazy part, right? And then you have organizations like yourself doing 15,000 meals by donation, not without funding, without. That's the part that again, we're not the U.S., but that was the attack from the right on FEMA and Red Cross, and I got to believe that there's something there. I don't know to the extreme. I didn't dive into it, but we do have that breakdown here as well. There's no question about it. I experienced it firsthand.
I want to just express my frustration with, we have a park in Lower Mission called Woodhaven Conservatory Park. Now this park is beautiful. Our family loves it. However, if I showed you the pictures of the dead trees, because there's a dry creek bed now that runs through that is capped. There's no water flowing into that. So you can see the the fuel, basically. I've gone to the regional district, to the city, to various people and said, hey, listen, I'm not trying to be that guy, but this is in the hub of a bunch of neighborhoods. How can we go forward when this thing is like a lightning strike, kids playing around? Like, the interface would be incredible. In your eyes, Ron, what are some effective means for anybody, not just me, but any constituents, to kind of move the needle on something that we're not trying to be alarmist, but we're also trying to say, hey, we want to save our houses and we want to save our neighborhoods. What would you suggest?
That one's surprising, because certainly that's a regional park, and certainly the city has arborists that go in. And I mean, I lived in a neighborhood that had, back in 2003, that was fire smarted. So in fact, when the fire hit around, although my property was right beside public space, they had trimmed the trees properly, they had thinned it all out, it was nice and clean, and the fire did what it was supposed to do and run along the ground, and they put it out. So I don't know why. Is it because it's called a conservatory and they think they got to leave it alone?
Or is it because Rick lives near us as well?
That's where he sunbathes. That's why.
BC's burning all right.
Yeah.
I think the birds won't like it when the trees burn down.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what was in that documentary, Rick, that you were behind, that every forest has to be properly managed, and allowing it to build up is just creating a problem in a neighborhood. I mean, I'd keep pursuing it, certainly with the regional district, but your representatives from the city that sit on the regional district, because the city, all the fund, 75% of the funding for regional parks come from Kelowna citizens. They not direct, but they tax you as the regional district. So, yeah, I think that that we know how those areas are supposed to be managed. I'm not sure why this particular area isn't, but I would certainly look at that. Going back to how we deal with recovery. I mean, I've now dealt with 2 or 3 recoveries, and most of the provincial money is focused on the first 48 hours, because most things happen right then and there. But it's interesting that the provincial government's system is by volunteers. So you're only as good as the volunteers that are trained and in place when those things happen. And so we've had great experiences, wonderful experiences, and we've had bad experiences where, maybe the volunteer that, signed up maybe a bit grumpy and isn't kind of dealing. So we're dealing with volunteers at a point where it could be very critical. And I think depending on the size of the emergency, I think, most of the time they can handle. But when you have a huge emergency, that's really puts strain on the volunteers and their ability. So again, that goes back to the province. Why is it like that? And I've always seen probably the biggest piece that was missing in recovery was mental health. We made sure in most cases you had a hotel, you had food vouchers, you had clothes vouchers. For that first week or 2, you'd be okay. But in my experience, the real lingering effect has always been the mental health effect. That people are we had people in Kelowna in 2003 never rebuilt their homes. Couldn't even decide what to do with it.
Yeah.
And then you had me walking around going, this is kind of awesome. I never liked the door frames, like the whole countertops were brown, like it was terrible.
When we had the Jasper fire, I read a great article in the Globe and Mail that talked about, we focus now on climate change and the concerns around this. Indigenous groups have been doing fire mitigation for a couple hundred years, long before any of our ancestors got here, and we totally ignored that. And we have a huge challenge with reconciliation and some other multiple issues with going on in this country right now. Like, it's a great merriment to me to say, hey, Indigenous groups that have been doing this for a couple hundred years, can we put this in your hands? Like, to me, these are pretty easy dots to connect, and I just don't know why we're not doing that. Like, why would we not be?
Well, in going back to the forester I worked with on the film, he talked about the fact that, for prescribed burning, for example, he says guess how many hectares they were able to treat last year? And I said, okay, well, 2023, a million hectares approximately burned. I don't know, 10,000, 50,000, like I have no idea. And he says 2,000 hectares. So as a result of that, you think about why not as much, and he gave some overarching ideas, and he says, well, prescribed burning, you have to make sure that you have fire breaks, you have to have equipment, you have to have people on the ground, it needs to be treated before you go. And Indigenous burning, also very important, but it needs to have some context, I guess. And I was at a conference, and one of the elders was asked about Indigenous burning. She goes, yeah, we did some. And the reporter asked, and how did it go? And she goes, we overachieved. So I think you have to really, there's that happy medium that we talk about, which is making sure that you do have the planes and possible ways to suppress those ideas. But, go see BC's burn.
And shit happens. I mean, one of the reasons back in 2003, people said, well, that park, Okanagan Mountain Park, should have been better managed. But I also remember one of the big pushes by the regional district in those days where it was air quality. They venting, they put in all the venting programs. I think there was some political pressure, not necessarily to have, controlled burning. Around that same time, you had Yellowstone National Park that controlled burning that went out of control and burned down the park. So, again, so I don't think it's simple, but I think, again, sometimes, people jump on, reasons not to do something that are pretty simplistic. It's complex, and sometimes things are going to go wrong. So if they do controlled burning, some point in time it's going to go wrong. I don't much bet on it. Right?
Yeah, and I don't remember the timeline totally of 2003. I worked for Mark Anthony at the time, so I was based on Mission Hill. And I remember being up there from my office, and we were like out the window like, hey, look at that. And it was just a plume of smoke going straight up. And I don't know if that was a day or an hour, but like I remember being at work thinking no one was thinking, man, that whole mountain's going to go on fire. It was like, oh, look at that, And then from whatever happened from that moment in my head, which for sure was real, to where we went, right? Like, arguably a water bomber could have hit that pretty quickly and probably shut it down. But again, it's you're 20 plus years ago.
It was, yeah, I know. And I was on the boat and watched it that Sunday morning. Went out with Jerry Zimmerman and we looked at it, and it was far away from the city at that point. And I just think that a lot too many people. And remember, they were dealing, as they are often, with like 348 other forest fires, simultaneously, and that one was away from the city. And I've never thought that there was a different way to handle it. Sorry, it was my view on the get people out of the road side of the fire, as opposed to the managing it. But I also know that one night sitting in fire hall, it was late, and the fire boss came, and Brian Kemp, he had been on 25, 30 years working for Wildfire BC. And I said, whew, Brian, I'm like, what happens when a fire this big hits an urban area? He goes, I don't know, I've never seen a fire this big. Wow. So just imagine how I felt at that point.
Well, weren't you going to make a stand at KLO or something?
Yeah. They were going to bulldoze houses and everything. Yeah.
Like everything lower emission on. Like your house would have been gone, Scott.
Yeah.
Your house would have been gone.
No surprise. No surprise.
All the firewood and gasoline cans he leaned up.
Do you still have a cedar shake roof?
We do have a cedar shake. I am interested to loop back. I was thinking a couple things on the mitigation, but on the Woodhaven run, I'm interested. Let's say there was a landscaping company that had the machinery, and there's this little park beside Rick's place there, and they're like, "Hey, we'll volunteer." Is that an issue with the city or regional district that it's a volunteer versus union or what have you? Like, or can groups go? Yeah,
actually, there's provincial funding. There was in the past to actually mitigate areas, and so I know the regional district, for example, for a number of years. I've been gone for a number of years, but I know that they did mitigation in the what do you call it? The Mission Greenway. As the Mission Greenway went around Gallagher's Canyon and stuff, they took advantage of that program and actually did mitigation. So, why Woodhaven in particular is a concern, I don't know, because there has been grants, and the regional district has always availed themselves.
It just seems like there's a lot of houses around that park. Like it would come over that, into that gully and just continue on and just be a fire furnace. I don't know.
No, I think you should be pursuing it. I wouldn't have to get you a support dog or something just to live there.
I'll just send them copies of the film.
There was a fire. We got to give credit to the Forest Service as well, like in the fire suppression, because a couple of weeks back there was the fire just outside by UBCO there, and we happened to be watching our nephew play some football, and so we were kind of watching as the planes masterfully put that out but they got to it quickly, and there was I think there was 8 planes we counted that were just on that one. Now there wasn't 4 fires or 4D fires going on at a time, but it was pretty impressive to see that.
Well, I think there's even new technology now with drones that can actually attack, fires on a grid system, and it seems like for a long time we were just relying on Air Canada and WestJet for spotting fires, which has its own problems. But and again, going back to the doc, there was one stat that I'm proud that we were able to bring forward, which was California spends $1 billion a year on forest fire mitigation. BC has 75% more forest to cover, and we spend $55 million. So it just kind of puts it into perspective, and we know what happened in California. So
Hey, it's just taxes.
it's just way to just condense it down.
It's a valid point though, Ron.
Ron Mattiussi, thanks so much. Jeff Cox, thanks so much. Scott Lanigan, I'm Rick Maddison, 1 foot off center. Thanks so much for watching and listening.